All right, you joyously miserable accursed. Who among you feels joyous and who feels miserable depends on whether you're a liberal or a conservative. If you're a liberal from Carleton, you're probably feeling fan joyous right now. And if you're NDP, well, feeling miserable is probably a step up. It's the Curse of Politics Day After Election 45 podcast, and we're up at the goddamn crack of Carney to bring it to you. So early in the morning, 6:15 where I am, I can still hear the data science's gears grinding away, trying to find 4 more seats. I'm David Herle. With me, as always, is the best political panel in Canada by far, Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz, and Kory Teneycke, here to talk about all the results and give you our opinion on why they broke the way they did. So I don't know, you guys.
Fan joyous, crack of Carney.
Yeah.
We've all had 90 minutes sleep, and you're going to give us wordplay?
Yeah. I'm
All right.
clever.
Bring
Literally
it up.
90
So
minutes
glad.
sleep.
Well, fuck. Yeah.
Fuck, what time did we leave? We didn't leave the studio till like 2:30.
It was on air
And
until
then
2:30.
I don't know, it was like 30-minute ride home
Listen
and
to
then
us.
blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's no
Yeah.
one harder working in this business than you, Scott Reid. Like, you're
Yeah.
going to finish this and drive to Kingston, teach a bunch of impressionable young minds for like 7 hours. Anyway, brother,
Nothing. Nobody's ever retarded
respect.
than I have.
Respect.
I shovel words all day long. It's just picking
And
and picking the words out of the granite.
to do it at,
Blah, blah, blah.
at your age,
That's
immediately before your birthday, also no
Let's not
mean
draw
feat.
attention to that. I'll only be 41 once.
Your best Paul Lind impression.
I guess I'd have to say a pirate.
Okay. Should we talk about politics?
Yeah, let's.
Jordan, I know you don't want to.
If we must.
Should we talk about politics?
This may be your last time, Jordan.
So, what's the big picture? I mean, first of all, the big picture is we had an election last night. Tons of people voted, and nobody seemed to dispute the results. And these days, that can't be taken for granted. So we did that as a country last night. And beyond that, we got a mass of confusing results. I mean, looked at on a 6-month trajectory, the Liberal result is fucking unbelievable. But looked at on a 2-week trajectory, the Liberal result is disappointing. The Conservatives have so much to be happy about in their campaign in terms of how close they were, how many seats they won in places like Ontario where we didn't expect, how much they actually rated the NDP vote, not just the Liberals, but the Conservatives appeared to rate the NDP vote, yet they fell short yet again. And Poilievre lost his seat decisively. So, as Kory had been foreshadowing on this pod, and then there's the NDP. I don't know what to say about that. So maybe actually, Jordan, maybe we'll just start there and just give us a little soliloquy.
Yeah, it's a devastating result. That's the literally the worst result in the party's history. To lose party status obviously means not having important resources that help you work in Parliament and help towards rebuilding. Singh resigning as leader last night, I think it was very much the right move. It would have been difficult for him to pass a leadership review after this. But the party is now staring down a pretty long period of rebuilding in a pretty unstable circumstance. Just to speak to what you were saying earlier about the Liberal result, I think that in the end, everybody got something kind of shitty out of this election. So that's the NDP result. The Conservatives obviously managed something, I think easily their best result since 2011, but they tanked a 25-point lead and their leader lost their seat. Now they have a period of infighting in front of them. And the Liberals, well, of course, that is a huge turnaround and a win. It's an unstable one. And having a minority with the ability to dance with a few dance partner is probably better than having the ability to only dance with a block, which is what it looked like at one point yesterday evening. But that's also not a great circumstance because there's really no stability there. We could be ending up back up in an election within a year or two.
Yeah. Scott, if I'm reading our audience right, people are quite anxious to know what's going on in the room of worries this morning.
Well, a lot of people would think Kory and I got off TV with CTV last night around 2:15, 2:30. So a lot of people would have thought that I ran right home and went to sleep for 3 hours. But in fact, I just sat down on my favorite chair in the room full of worries and I talked for a while there with my worries. And I have a brand new room full of worries now. I have a bunch of worries about how is Mark Carney going to respond to the threats that he must as a prime minister, which I think are going to require radical decisions that will require a degree of voluntary unpopularity. Like I just, even in the midst of crisis, when people give you permission to do things they might not otherwise, I still think he's going to have to take decisions and make moves that will be unpopular, but he will not have the protection of a majority government, and he will therefore be constantly vulnerable to the threat of an election. And I think that's going to hurt his position, and I think that's going to I think I don't want to sound like, highfalutin, but I think that's going to hurt the country. I think that's going to cause, some real challenges, because I think it's going to be in the interests of Pierre Poilievre to constantly be chicken hawking this thing, looking for an opportunity to break down Mark Carney and to break up this government. And he made it crystal clear in his comments last night. And I'm sure we'll come back to that. But Pierre Poilievre, to my ear, was saying, this is a victory speech that I'm delivering to you now. This is victory delayed, not denied. Forget what might happen in my riding of Carleton. I will remain leader, and I will finish this government off, and I will become prime minister. That has been the project of my lifetime since I was 7 years old, carrying my scientific calculator and a collection of Margaret Thatcher speeches to, grade 7 gym. So
mostly aimed at an internal audience, though, Scott, wouldn't you say?
Incredibly, to a certain degree, you could say it was tone deaf because it was, but probably necessarily so, because obviously he was in a precarious position, and so he wanted to exhibit strength to all those who might take him on. Leave no question he intended to fight, that he would marshal as many resources to hold on to his job. But it didn't say a lot to a country that arguably, based on their votes, want to see people come together in response to this sort of common threat of Trump. So yeah, room full of worries. You goddamn right, room full of worries. Send me some coffee. I'm not going anywhere.
Hold the presses, folks. Scott's now worried about Canada.
I am.
Yeah.
I've always been worried about Canada, David, and I'm puzzled that Canada isn't more worried about me.
Who remembers turning 25? Well, good for you, but I do not. There was quite likely a celebration, and probably some involvement of rum. Again, I don't recall, which may prove the previous point. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, is celebrating their 25th anniversary of making the future friendly. Today, when you think of Canada's iconic national brands, TELUS is most definitely one. How they went from a Western regional phone company to a multifaceted global technology leader merits a look back, I think. Y2K. Remember that hip at the time abbreviation? TELUS had just established a national presence with 4.3 million phone-only customers. 5 years later, they diversified into entertainment services with TELUS TV. 2008 to 2010 saw massive expansion of their wireless networks, just as smartphones began to take over the world. Prescient, because it put TELUS on the leading edge of the mobile revolution. In 2013, TELUS introduced its advanced Pure Fibre network, turbocharging Canadians' internet with the unmatched speed and reliability of 100% direct-to-the-home fibre connection. Cut to today. TELUS has outgrown being just TELUS. There's TELUS Digital, TELUS Health, and TELUS Agriculture and Consumer Goods. Over 20 million customers in more than 160 countries. They've gone from being worth a few hundred million in 2000 to a brand valuation of 12.1 billion Canadian dollars in 2025. And you can't tell the TELUS story without this. Over their 25 years, they've contributed more than $1.8 billion to charitable and community organizations, including a rather astounding 2.4 million days of volunteerism. Adapting to technology and change, and here's the key part, how it can make people's lives better. That's the core of what TELUS has been doing for a quarter century. It's what they'll continue to do in the future. A more precise glimpse of that next week. Kory, what's your big takeaway from the whole shooting match?
Well, I've got a lot of takes on it, I think. Where to start? There's so much to talk about here. I agree with some of what Scott said, but
You gotta tell us which parts?
Yeah, I will. Look,
Not the part where he was talking.
I don't think that was the most magnanimous speech on the part of Poilievre I've ever heard. But and I think the reasons are why Scott articulated, like losing the riding and stuff, puts you in a different position. But I think his leadership at the end of that night is very safe. Like that caucus has a bunch more people who were elected under his name and who are loyalists to him. And it was a very strong finish and surprising in enough parts of the country and numerically sufficient that I don't think he's going anywhere, and I don't think there's going to be any serious challenge to him going anywhere. But that said, like I shared Scott's worries about Canada in a bunch of ways, because I think it was close to a lot of things. It was close to conservative victory. It was also close to a liberal majority, and at the end of that, you've got a very divided country, a very polarized country. That is going into existential negotiations with the United States and going into a series of existential decisions about its own economic and political future in terms of our own economy and wealth and prosperity and ability to fund things that Jordan would like and that others would like. All of that is sort of hanging in the balance in a very precarious way right now. I agree with you, David, in your opening comments that we shouldn't take for granted the importance of the fact that everybody had an election that was that close and that contentious and that divided, and stood up and accepted the result and faced the public at the end of that in a way that I think is used to be accepted as being normal, and now I think is exceptional. I think it's more exceptional than accepted.
Right.
So, look, what else would I say? I think if you're looking at how do you govern if you're Carney, and how do you comport yourself if you're Poilievre, there is a bunch of commonality. Like if you were to take the election campaigns of the Liberals and the Conservatives and do the Venn diagram of it, there's a lot of overlap there. There's some, I would say probably 90% overlap if you're talking about intent, and something less than that, but not hugely less. Maybe it's 70% overlap if you took about, or 65% overlap, but like significant overlap if you're talking about, even the approach that you take to get to those goals. So if Carney's serious about the need for Canada to take its own economic future into its hands and to build things faster and build, or whatever his line was last night, then there's a lot to work with, not only with I
Build
think
baby build. Actually,
build
I think
baby
if you're looking
build
for
baby
American,
build.
if you're looking for American political
Yeah, you
references,
know,
Yeah.
isn't that funny in a way? It's
In a way,
we
it's sort of
I mean,
funny.
is
Kind
it?
of a face wash, really, on all
Yeah.
the anti-Trump
Uh,
stuff.
well, that you got to go back to I think build baby build is, you know, drill baby drill.
That's
That's
it.
you're
Yeah.
No
you're
question.
you're going back to the McCain campaign in that one. But look, there is something to do there, right? And if it's let's build more housing, there's something to do there. But you know, the approach on housing is very different. I don't think that the approach on pipelines and resource development and stuff is as different. And I think there is something to do there, but I wouldn't be reaching to the NDP and the Greens and the Bloc, who I think are all anti-development. I'd be reaching to the Conservatives. I would be looking to make a grand coalition.
Greens is not plural, by the way. Just
Yeah,
Green,
it's a
yeah,
singular.
green.
It's
Yeah,
an
green.
Elizabeth May, actually. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah. Well, like talk about somebody with you know, more lives than a barnhouse cat. Like she politically, she's anyway, unbelievable. But look, I think there is a grand bargain that has potential there. But in order to choose to do that, like there's a couple of forks in the road for Polyev, and there's a couple of forks in the road for Carney in terms of choosing national interest over partisan interest in the short term. But I'll posit a political prediction in saying that, which is I think the good politics here in this electorate is to actually accomplish something and to work together and to work across party lines. And I think, you know, whichever, you know, leader does that to the maximum extent, there may not be, you know, a huge reward for that, but I think there'll be a punishment if you don't. I think that there is a desire to try to bring the country together a bit here. And I don't think it would be good for the Liberals to be overly self-congratulatory in this circumstance. And I don't think it would be, you know, advantageous for the Conservatives to be overly partisan and thinking, you know, more about the next election and taking power, which I think is an, you know, an inevitable thing at you know, probably in the next election. But thinking about that more than the national interest. So I think there's an opportunity and a risk here. So, you know, next to Scott's room full of worries is Kory's room full of optimism and opportunity. And I know which room I want to live in. Scott, no offense.
So, you can do a good thing this coming Sunday. The annual CN Cycle for CHEO, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, is coming up. Last year, the event raised more than $2 million. That money, and I mean all that money, went toward treating children with cancer. 500 kids are currently cancer patients at CHEO. 100 children are diagnosed with cancer at CHEO every year. With help from CN-sponsored fundraising, CHEO provides things like tailored personal treatment plans and gentler, less invasive forms of therapy. I did not know this, but scientists at CHEO have helped produce oncolytic viruses that attack cancers while leaving healthy cells alone. Sort of amazing. It's not hard to imagine how shattering a child cancer diagnosis is for a parent, and the money from CN's Cycle for CHEO helps ease that burden too. Yes, Canada has universally insured medical care, but we all know it isn't that simple. Serious diseases end up costing families money. Parents of children with cancer often have to travel or spell each other off. They have to take time from work, and those who don't live in Ottawa need somewhere to stay while they're with their children at the hospital. CN's Ride for CHEO helps give them a place to rest. Anyway, look, stepping up is a lovely thing. Just Google the CN Cycle for CHEO and it's all there. If you live in Ottawa, you can ride. If you don't, you can register as a sponsor. It all helps. This is the 18th annual ride CN has sponsored, and it's been richly rewarding to see the attendance and fundraising totals climb with each passing year. CN staff will be out volunteering Sunday. You can too. When treatment is over and cancer is in remission, a child at CHEO gets to ring a bell. It is a joyous moment. I mean, can you think of a better use for money than helping make that happen? So I don't know. I don't know what any of you are talking about. Jordan started this, and then Scott carried it on, and then Kory picked it up. What are you talking about? The Liberals have 168 seats. The NDP have 7. The Greens have 1. The Bloc have 23. Why can't Carney just govern like Harper did when he had minorities? Like, who wants an election besides the Conservatives in that parliament? Like, the NDP won't be forcing an election for years.
It's bad for Canada, that's why. And we're about to go down to Washington and renegotiate our economic relationship with the United States. And I think, those other parties have been unwilling to take a centrist approach when it comes to economic development. And by the way,
but I don't even
so
think he
has
needs to reach out to them. I mean, like, they just can't do anything. They can't
Well,
force it.
I think Kory's making some interesting points here, but he's describing a federal conservative party that doesn't exist. There's no world in which that is the tact that Pierre Poilievre takes towards a Carney government. It is not in him. There was nothing, for example, in his remarks last night that indicated he has even the slightest interest of doing anything like that. So I think, for the good of the country, I think Kory is making some great arguments, but I think it's fictitious because there's no dance partner for that with the Conservatives. In fact, I think instead what we're going to see is the Conservatives take the opportunity to fan the flames of national division on these things. And I think we're going to see it really fast. I mean, Mark Carney's honeymoon ended at 12:01 a.m. This is going to be an incredibly challenging period in the immediate aftermath of this election. And I think it matters a great deal what he does with these first 100 days in order to bring people together around some of the very difficult decisions that are going to have to happen. And I don't think the Conservatives are going to lend a single fucking hand to him in consolidating that.
Well, maybe and maybe not. But I'll give some advice to Mark Carney. I would offer a by-election immediately for Poilievre should somebody in his caucus want to step down and let him run. I would do that not as one can 6 months later. I would do it immediately. And I would also do something else because, weird idiosyncratic fact about official residences. The official opposition's residence, so Stornoway, goes to the leader of the opposition in the House. And so are you going to throw Poilievre and his family out of their home? Or are you going to change those rules and let them stay? Because that's ultimately what's going to happen 6 or 7 months from now. But there are some things like that you could do to demonstrate goodwill that I think would, be smart. I think they'd also be, appropriate. I'd probably also propose to allow the NDP to continue to have party status. And I would do that probably to the Greens too.
Ontario Liberals going, what?
Yeah.
What?
Oh, I'm not.
Don't look for consistency in this, David. It was different before.
Yeah,
but there's an advantage to the Liberals in that to have a more stable dance partner.
But
sure.
the future, but look, the future of Canada is on the line around what happens next in ways that we haven't seen, probably since Confederation, when the country came together out of fear of American invasion. Because that's what it was. It wasn't love of, different parts of the country for some national project. It was born out of fear of our neighbor to the south. And I think we're in that kind of, not to be overly dramatic about it, but I think we're in that kind of situation again.
Yes. Look, you guys are all right, but I'm most right. And here's what I mean. Kory is right in that it makes it. Well, yeah, don't worry about it. Listen, let's start with you then, David. Okay. You're right. You're right in the sense that, like I'm like the old Scottish lady who gets a brand new house and then says, oh my God, right? And now I'm going to have to go out and buy furniture. So I understand that the Liberals won. I understand that they were dead and buried 4 months ago. I understand that this is a remarkable personal achievement for a guy who's never stepped 1 foot into the political arena and suddenly has led this remarkable resurrection and come within 4 seats of a majority government. But I still believe, like I wanted Mark Carney to have a majority. But I think the country needed Mark Carney to have a majority, because you're right, David, he can govern more or less like he has a majority. He knows that there's a limited ability of the opposition parties to bring him down right now, practically speaking. But he is, because of this unique moment, he is really going to have to make some tough decisions. He's going to have to make some trade-offs. And, even he signaled that in his speech last night. There's going to be sacrifice. And I don't want him to do the right thing as prime minister and make himself wildly unpopular within 2 months. But that may be very difficult to avoid in this circumstance. So you're right that he can sort of manage without doing any kind of giant grand bargain with these guys. But I still think we're all right when we say there are difficult decisions to be made that are going to have political risk. And I think Kory's right.
Well, I'm just going to stop you because you're
Okay.
attacking me.
I am attacking
me
you.
directly, so I'm going to fucking stop you.
Well, God damn it.
I'm going to
Duke's
say
up.
I agree on the need for coalition building. I agree that the government has an incomplete mandate. I agree with coalition building. I think that a lot of that has to do with the premiers, because I'm like Jordan. I just don't see the Poilievre Conservatives as a dance partner
Yeah, that's
in
what
anything
Jordan's
going forward. So the Carney government has to be very sensitive about what its mandate is. I wasn't disputing that.
Right.
All I was suggesting is that I doubt they have any difficulty in the House of Commons for the long foreseeable future.
Fair enough. But Jordan is also right in that there is not a single scrap of evidence in the speech that he gave last night, the way he has comported himself his entire political career, that there is an opportunity to go to Pierre Poilievre and say, you know what, let's put forward into the House a series of initiatives around energy infrastructure, and let's get your blessing. He will vote against a Liberal budget. He will vote by reflex and declare it to be his obligation as His Majesty's loyal leader of the opposition. And that's just the way this guy is. And his mission is interrupted but not ended. And I mean, it's marvelously interrupted by losing his own riding. He's not going to, I hear what you're saying, Kory, but I don't believe that he will make that political calculation. I don't believe that he will say, oh yeah, you know what? Like, let's work together and get some things done. He's not, this is like Trump giving Biden the immigration bill. He's not going to do it. It's not
he's
in
also
his nature.
he's got to look to his own leadership. So he's also talking to his members. He's talking to his base in that party, all of it, which would argue against any type of concession to the Liberals.
Well, I only heard one person last night who was questioning his leadership, and was Jamil Javani, who was also suggesting that the path is to go to war against Doug Ford.
That was a remarkable interview that suggests that we might hear more from young Mr. Javani as time goes on.
He might become a little harder to handle.
Yeah, well,
his best friend.
We were talking about the frog and the scorpion before. Anyway, look, I not only agree that Poilievre would vote against the Liberal budget. I think he should vote against the Liberal budget because that's what the opposition does. However, I do not think that he would vote against an energy corridor bill that was at the center of his party platform. I don't think he would vote against that. I do think the Bloc would, and I think it's very much in question. If the only reason NDP wouldn't vote against it is self-preservation, perhaps, and maybe they wouldn't. But I do think the Conservatives would vote for something like that. And I actually think that would be a very good thing to do for national unity, which I think as a result of Carney winning and the Liberals winning is under strain in the Western, third of the country.
In large houses, on safe streets, protected by our proud women.
Actually, only
I will get a better energy corridor
in the prairies in the interior. I mean, we could get to BC in a second, but the Liberal results there are worth a comment on themselves. Extraordinary in my lifetime experience. Our sponsors at CanDo have been talking a lot here on the podcast about how CanDo Reactor's proven Canadian design helps ensure our energy security. Fact is, no foreign-designed reactor can be built and adapted to Canadian safety standards without a reliance on enriched fuel, processed abroad, and then imported into Canada. Only CanDos run on Canadian fuel. So in today's protectionist world, CanDo reactors avoid any reliance on foreign countries. They offer us the security of knowing Trump tariffs and moratoriums won't stop our power operators from delivering cheap, reliable, carbon neutral power to Canadians. And then there's this. CANDO recently went on the record in a Globe and Mail interview. They said construction of new reactors in Ontario to buttress the existing high-functioning refurbished fleet would require an expanded workforce of engineers, as well as manufacturing and skilled trades employees. If Trump's tariffs end up harming our auto sector, a wide variety of auto workers could be recruited into the nuclear industry. That's mighty important stuff, because over 125,000 people are directly employed in manufacturing vehicles and parts. Having other options for displaced workers will be critically important in achieving our energy security. CANDO reactors have been providing carbon-neutral power for the Canadian economy for over 60 years, employing thousands across the country and producing critical, life-saving medical isotopes used in hospitals across Canada and around the world. CANDO technology, designed by Canadians, built by Canadians, for the benefit of Canadians. Let's get moving. I want to go to something different because I'm not as high-minded as you people thinking about the governance of the country. I'm still thinking about the politics of last night. And Jordan, maybe you can lead us off on this. But Scott, I have my own room of worries. And in my room of worries, I look at last night's result and I say the coalition of people that Poilievre put together in this election campaign looks to me like it's more durable than the coalition the Liberals put together in this election campaign. And I don't know that we can count on the NDP being dead forever. I mean, they were dead for almost the whole 90s before they came back. But I don't know how much that can be counted on. Bloc support can flare up at any moment, and Mark Carney doesn't seem like the ideal person to cement a permanent Liberal majority in Quebec. So I'm kind of worried about whether these circumstances can be replicated.
Yeah, I think they're super unique, super unique. This was an exceptional election in almost every way, right from the ballot question to what happened in the polls immediately before it, to the external factors that drove right through E-Day. And it's hard to imagine that a year from now, two years from now, that the Trump threat would play the same sort of unifying force that it did in this campaign. And look, I agree with you about the conservative vote. Last night we saw a good chunk of New Democrat vote go to the Conservatives in places where that was not an expected outcome. And I think that it's clear that with respect to the NDP votes that the Liberals are borrowing, Carney's been hired for a job, like a very specific job. He's been hired to take on Trump, to deal with the tariff war. And I think that
And because of Mulcair, we know what you people do to somebody that doesn't do their job.
Well, yeah. And like, it's kind of a loveless thing in that sense, right? Like, those voters aren't there because they have any personal attachment to Mark Carney. They're not there because they're Liberals. They're there. They feel a little bad about it, but they were making a decision with a very specific set of criteria with a very specific situation. And if Carney's not able to deliver on that, and if that situation changes, those votes absolutely can flow back to where they came from. And I would argue that that is actually probably more tenuous than what might be attracting NDP voters to the Conservatives, which would be more a change and a sense of concern around affordability issues. So I agree with you. I think I would be worried about that. I mean, I think a lot, and others have made this comparison, but I think a lot about what happened to Keir Starmer in the UK, right? When this kind of victory comes in, there is no honeymoon. There is a lot of immediate pressure to deliver. And if you make those missteps in that initial period, it's very hard to regain that. And when I look at the last half of the Liberal campaign, if I were a Liberal, I would be pretty worried, because what we saw was Carney effectively stop campaigning on the main ballot question that was getting him elected halfway through the fucking campaign. He just stopped and let it cruise, and he got sucked in to what is the campaign version of governmentitis, platform, all the internal stuff, transition, all of that. And if he is going to come into this government, this period as prime minister, and lose himself in those very serious, and I don't want to diminish them because these are really big challenges with the US, but if he's going to turn inwards and focus on solving those problems instead of continuing to communicate outwards with Canadians, I think he could really set himself up for a poor situation there.
Well, Scott, I probably talk too much. Do you want to go? But I have
No,
a lot of
go
thoughts
ahead,
on
man.
all this. Look, I think it's worth talking about what happened with NDP. So, like, if you're to look at like the polling and the poll aggregators, almost bang on in Atlantic Canada, almost bang on in Quebec, and but nationally, and nationally for the Liberal number, bang on. What happened? You saw like another 2.5 points of NDP vote fall away, but it fell away to the Conservatives. If you want to look at what happened in Ontario, Liberal number, bang on. Conservatives like got 3 points from the NDP, 2.5 points from the NDP, and they got it disproportionately in what I would call well, like southwestern Ontario and Niagara, but like where manufacturing and like blue collar worker, like the trade
Brian
union
Massey
movements.
finished third.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
it's incredible.
So if we're going to say, is that permanent and enduring? I think it is. I think it is. I think those voters have been leaving for a long time, like the ones that went to the Conservative Party. But I don't think the remaining NDP vote, and Kathleen was using this line last night too, that these voters are on loan and stuff. Yeah, that's one possible outcome here. There is another possible outcome, which is that we're moving to a two-party system in English Canada, and that the NDP don't really exist. And while it's not hired for a specific job, as you say, it's that we are now in a polarized electorate, and whether Trump's there or not, it's going to be, do you want a conservative government or don't you? And that swing that the Liberals tend to get from NDP voters actually becomes a permanent feature in federal electoral politics. That's another possibility. And look, Jordan, you might be right. Kathleen might be right. But that this other possibility I'm laying out, that might be right too, because
Yeah.
there's lots of indications of that being the dynamic in a lot of other countries. And that's not what we've had in the past. But today, the NDP got the shit kicked out of them everywhere. And in some places, even more. But I think it put a lot of pressure on some natural fault lines.
Every
that
stat you pull out of the air, Kory, is just unbelievable. They don't have a seat in Ontario. Their leader finished third in his riding. I mean, it's
Yep.
just unbelievable.
Yeah, well, it's like it ceases to exist. And maybe we will see that outcome, because I think it's a very possible outcome here. Like, what is the core constituency of the NDP right now? And like, look, just to opine a little more on this, it's so bad. Their ability to draw from what I've talked about before, the roots in Western Canada and other places, is going to be non-existent. They're going to end up, electing like a transgender Palestinian protester in a wheelchair, more likely than they're going to, bring in Wab Kinew or Rachel Notley or somebody like that. Like I think it's going to put huge pressure on those fault lines that exist, and I don't think in a good way. And I think it's like the chances they're even more marginalized are much higher than the chances that they become more mainstream.
We're excited to be working with our new sponsor, TikTok Canada, talking about how their local employees are supporting the success of Canadian content creators and small businesses. Creators like Toronto's Caitlin Campbell, owner of Street Brew Coffee. She's built a TikTok community of over 1.3 million followers, teaching people how to make better coffee and sharing her journey as a small business owner. Over the holidays, Street Brew Coffee was one of the local businesses featured at TikTok Canada's Small Biz Pop-Up at Toronto's Union Station, which helped creators turn their followers into real-life customers. The market was built and promoted by TikTok's Canadian team, just one of the many ways their hundreds of employees are supporting the success of Canadians. But now, these jobs are at risk. The federal government has ordered TikTok to shut down its Canadian operations, closing offices and cutting hundreds of highly skilled, well-paying jobs. With a new government in Ottawa, there's an opportunity to pursue a balanced path, one that keeps local teams in place to support the success of Canadian creators and businesses while addressing security concerns and fostering a thriving tech sector. Shutting down TikTok Canada eliminates hundreds of local jobs and investments vital for our economy. Let's find a solution for TikTok that makes sense for its more than 14 million monthly Canadian users, including creators, small businesses, and advertisers. Stay tuned in the coming weeks to hear more about the work TikTok Canada's team does to support creators like Caitlin. Jordan, I saw you make a face, but I just want you to acknowledge. I don't want you to acknowledge. I don't want you to make any face at all. I'm just going to say something, and you don't have to respond.
And then I want you to agree with it.
If I told you before the election that you had to pick 7, you wouldn't have picked this 7.
Well, I would have certainly picked some seats in Ontario. That's for fucking sure. And look, there absolutely has to be a path for the party to regain seats in Ontario, and yes, to regain seats in working class areas, and yes, to regain them in manufacturing places like Southwestern Ontario. And I grant you, it's possible, the scenario that Kory outlined in terms of a more presidential system in Canada, maybe, but that is not the natural tendency we have here in Canada. It required significant external events to drive this election into that format here in Canada. And so without those events repeating themselves in the next election, I don't think it's a reasonable prediction. There is always going to be a constituency of people who are not going to find what they're looking for in the Liberal Party. And there is going to be space in those working class areas to contest in those blue-orange seats in those places with Conservatives. And I think we're going to continue to see that. And with respect to rebuilding and what type of leadership the party will elect, this is a moment where the party is going to be able to look and make a decision about what kind of party it wants to be. Does it want to be just an urban party? Does it want to be focused on identity issues? Or does it want to get back into the business of winning a popular vote? And I think that one of the takeaways for the NDP in this election, it's not enough to be right. You have to be viable. And I know that there's going to be a major discussion about that. And I think that that's going to actually drive a lot of different type of leadership candidates over the next few months.
But the external factor is not Trump. The external, it was Trump that collapsed the bloc vote. It was fear of a Poilievre victory that collapsed the NDP vote.
Well,
and that's not going away.
Both, but
or ultimately desire for a Poilievre victory, as we saw to pull.
Yeah, right. Yes, yeah, pulling on both sides of that. But Scott, those things go further than Trump.
Scott, we haven't heard from you in a while. I'm in my room full of worries about the Liberal coalition.
Right. So I want just a quick note on this debate. I had the exact same thought that Kory's expressing last night when the three of us, Kory, Kathleen, and I were at CTV, and because Kathleen used this exact same terminology as Jordan a couple of times, right? She said, well, now you got to be careful because NDP voters have lent Mark Carney their votes. And I thought, well, that is a large assumption. That is an assumption that the institution itself is just there and it's waiting and it will reclaim that. And I think it's going to be much harder work than that. I hear what you're saying, Jordan, and I don't mean to kick you when you're down, but I think the dynamic reality of it is that Avi Lewis will almost certainly, as a struggle for what's left and where the NDP goes from here, Avi Lewis is going to lead a sort of model parliament type marginal movement that will make the Waffles look like they are Republicans. And so I just think
but Scott, I have to interrupt you. Avi Lewis lost his seat. Look, there's going to be a left flank that runs in any type of leadership race, but that doesn't mean that they are going to win. There's going to be other sections within the party that are going to contest that. And I think it's reasonable to assume when you look at what's happening provincially for the NDP, where the party holds government, where it contests for power, there's a vested interest in Democrats across the country in looking for something that is more of a vehicle for victory than it is a vehicle for some of those ideological things.
Fair enough. All I'm saying, in my experience politically, when a party is at its low point, the insurgents have a natural advantage because they can be small but loud and more easily grab the scepter of change. But I want to put all that aside for 1 second because I want to go back. I really want to focus on David's question about what does the Liberal coalition look like, and now what's its sturdiness, and is it plausible? And this is why politically, as a partisan, I really wanted there to be a majority government last night, as compared to I felt that the country needed a majority government in order to deal with these challenges. Because you have to say to yourself, with the challenges that confront rookie Prime Minister Mark Carney, is it realistic to think that he's going to be able to come through that furnace fire of all that and lead his party to a fifth consecutive victory? That sounds like a tall order. And in terms of the sturdiness of the vote, the fickleness of Ontario, the fact that it ended up with fewer seats in Ontario last night than it did in 2021 really, really concerns me. And watching those GTA votes roll in really, really twisted a knife in my gut. And I think those votes and those ridings were there to be had. And I think one of the lessons, and it's a remarkable victory and a startling ride. And I'm not criticizing all the people who ran this campaign because they deserve credit for rescuing the party from what looked like certain death. But nevertheless, in the last 10 days, I think in particular, beginning with the platform, we really lost those Ontario voters. We really lost our claim on some more of the BC voters than we might have had. I think so. I'm worried about that. Here's what I think the answer is, though, David. And it might sound really crass, but I think the answer to how does Mark Carney win in the future and how does he strengthen this coalition that he appears to be trying to build or has built is the lesson that we learned from the first half of the campaign. Trump has seized the country. I actually think Mark Carney might want an election that's sooner rather than later. I think it may be in his interest because it seems to me that the swell of national pride that he was able to tap into, channel, and embody, it was the 51st state stuff, not just the tariff threat, as you talked about it, David. And I think that what's the recipe for winning? I think Mark Carney gets to work, does some things that are impossible to do seemingly, grabs this moment of crisis, takes advantage of permission that voters might give him to do things they might otherwise not, strikes a deal on trade and security with the United States that feels like it's strong, builds a relationship, maybe starts talking about whether or not we join the EU, puts all this on the table, and then says, now, this is the deal I've delivered to you, using my talents, my experience, and my unique ability, and I want to put it to the country as a referendum vote and a mandate. Seems to me that's the way that he goes back, and he taps that same sense of national pride and engagement. But there's there's a goddamn huge amount of assumptions about what can and will be accomplished in this period of time. But I'm not convinced that he wants to have a Trudeau-esque 4-year minority government just to survive. I think that trying to chip away and survive vote by vote might just bleed the body of this voter coalition. I think he's got to seize this moment and then put to the country a question around this stuff. And that's probably an 8 to 12 month project, not a 36 or 48-month project.
Right. Hey, Kory, can we talk about tariff politics in Ontario for a second? Because one of the results last night that really has confused me is that it is absolutely accepted wisdom, and I don't think there's any reason to doubt it, that the threat from Trump and tariffs is what drove Carney's and the Liberals' support. And among the most earliest attacked industries is the auto sector in Ontario, which is under significant tariff, and the whole industry is under real threat. And Carney and the Liberals lost the auto belt.
Yep.
To the Conservatives. So, like people in Cambridge, if this election was about who's going to defend you from Trump, why weren't the people of Cambridge voting Liberal?
Yeah.
Well, because not enough of them actually had that as their ballot question, and I think the Liberal campaign basically took the last 2 weeks of the campaign off, and they let that frame slip. And I think a lack of news coming out of Washington, like that, it was similar to what we saw in the first 3 weeks of the campaign, wasn't there to pull it back. But even if you look at the front end of the campaign where the Liberals were doing better, I'll posit to you that, Marco Mendicino and the people working on the government side were doing more for the Liberal campaign than the campaign team. Like the stuff that was working was coming out of the government side, not out of the campaign itself. I think the campaign itself was in some ways kind of like what the conservative campaign was at the beginning of the campaign, stuck in 2024.
Hmm.
Well, if you remember, leading into the debate week, we were all commenting that Carney was wobbling. He was, his
Well,
Q&As were not strong. There was lack of narrative focus for the campaign. So I think that was part of that issue.
yeah, yeah. I think that's all true. But say the Trump tweet that he put out on election day came, a week sooner, that would have been different maybe for them. But I don't think it was some genius of the Liberal campaign that was working for them. I think events are working for them and imposing a ballot frame around the election race that, absent Trump's activities, they were unable to maintain. Like
Hmm.
I think, yeah, those 2 weeks, man, like they were running a totally different campaign than they were in the beginning.
So you guys, I agree with that 1,000%. And they coasted home, assuming that they were winning, and they cut it too close. But
Too
um,
cautious.
but what intrigues me is something a little different. What intrigues me is that different parts of Ontario seem to have reacted to this very, very differently. So there are parts of Ontario where the Liberals are running up massive margins, and then parts of Ontario where Liberal incumbents got washed away. Francesco Sorbera up in the York
Yeah.
region got smoked, right?
Mhm.
And like I say, not winning the votes in the auto towns, and stuff like that. Like it was a weird mix of vote in Ontario.
Well, but like I think there are explanations for that are not that difficult to figure out. Like, uh, yeah,
Well, thanks for that.
well, but yeah, but
David,
look,
We didn't want to
Ottawa.
say anything, David.
you
Well,
need to put your
but
brand
look,
hat on,
no,
David.
but Ottawa. Why did Ottawa went like so overwhelmingly liberal? Like those races are like rural Alberta version
Yeah,
of like these were like 60 to 22. Like crazy numbers in that region. So, that's, and in downtown Toronto, yes, like all of that. But like I don't think that's mysterious. I think in terms of what happened in parts of the 905, you're talking about York region, other places where you had younger demographics and where housing prices, housing affordability generally, younger demographics, those ones went more disproportionately conservative. And look at those two campaigns. I criticism at the beginning of the campaign for Poilievre not focusing enough on Trump. They, kind of did some hybrid of that. But in the last couple of weeks of the campaign, especially after the Liberals and the NDP dropped their platforms, they were running a very affordability focused message track. And it appealed more to those voters. Like, they were talking about something that was way more, pertinent to them than the Trump thing was, and that was true throughout the campaign, right? Like there are certain parts that feel that way. Now, why did that happen in Southwestern Ontario? I think we already talked about part of the reason why. It's the NDP vote, in terms of private sector organized labor, picked up and walked over to the Conservatives in very large numbers.
yeah. I think, Scott, I think we need to have a little bit better handle um, on precisely who votes Liberal and who doesn't vote Liberal anymore, and why that is the case. Because I think we're making some assumptions about people, including new Canadians that maybe, or not so new Canadians, but not third gen Canadians, that maybe don't apply.
Well, I sure agree with that because I know that my inability to actually get the Elections Canada website functioning on the only night of the fucking year that I need it to work is a barrier to my complete understanding of what actually occurred. So I definitely think a deep dive into who won where, what the demos are, like that cross-tab analysis is absolutely critical to understanding what is the voter coalition and what denied you a majority government. And I also have a, and I know Kory is correct. I know we're all correct when we talk about the dominating factor of events and Trump and all of that, and how that created a dynamic at the top of the campaign that ultimately delivered, maybe even on fumes, it delivered 168 seats to Carney. I also think there's an issue, though, of when you're thinking about going forward, the Carney fit, right? There's also, it isn't just that this threat happened, it's also that someone stepped up and offered themselves who seemed like they fit the moment, the crisis, the conditions. And I think that there wasn't enough of that guy in the final 2 weeks. It wasn't
Can
just
you
that he
think of
wasn't
it?
talking.
There's no other Liberal that would have won this election. Do you think?
I agree with that
Right.
strongly. And so I think you have to get back. You have to do that analysis you're talking about, David, because I think you also have to say, well, who is the Mark Carney that needs to present himself on a continuing basis going forward now? And where is he reassuring and where is he bold? And I think you gotta really figure that out. My working assumption is get back to being the guy who said, I wanted to have a national discussion about our relationship with the EU if we can no longer rely upon the United States. I want to get back to, like, I get him within the next 10 days. I might have him in the Oval Office, as risky as that sounds, before I have him reinstalled as prime minister. Before he goes to Rideau Hall, I might have him at the Oval Office and demonstrating action and urgency on that file, starting to think about what those red lines are, what they're not, what's the basis, especially because Trump is divided and weak now. His tariff policy is falling apart around him as his polling numbers collapse, and you're starting to see Republicans more emboldened about speaking out against it. He may no longer have the zeal to take the tariff hammer to us. Anyway, there's something about the Carney fit. It's got to be figured out. The right Carney has got to be presenting himself to the country as prime minister all the time now, because the guy who presented that platform isn't the Carney that people were looking for or thought they had in the first 10 days, 2 weeks.
Well, if you want, I think, a partial answer to that question as to what he should do and like what's the appeal and where's the Liberal Party and what did Carney bring? Leadership is a good question for him. Like the Conservatives got 10 points more than their leader is popular. Like
Lost his own riding. Those who knew him best showed him the door.
But it's leadership, but it's also, I think, getting shit done in that area, right? Like, it's more than just having a meeting with Trump or doing something with Europe. Like, I think the message around building the economy and a different kind of change mandate, but like clearly the Carney platform, the Carney presentation, all of that only possible because it's actually largely a rejection of the Trudeau Liberal legacy and Trudeau Liberal record. And I would be looking to deliver something like what he talked about in the campaign, as opposed to, when it was working, as opposed to what they talked about in the campaign in the last 2 weeks, which sounded like we were right all along message track of, the same old, same old. Like
if he
looked
like he wasn't Trudeau, might have turned out to be more important than the days where he looked
yes,
like he wasn't Trump.
At the beginning of the campaign,
Absolutely.
where he's talking about getting rid of C-69 and doing things quicker, as opposed to the part of the campaign where he was talking about re-announcing things from Trudeau budgets. Like, he was those older voters that left the Conservatives to vote for the Liberals. They were not looking to, re-elect the Trudeau government. I will posit it.
I think that there's going to be a big temptation to lean heavily on the international stuff, to lean heavy on the Trump piece, to lean heavy on the ability to look to Europe and do all those things. And he's got to do that because that's part of his offer, his leadership mystique. That's part of what Canadians voted for. But he really does have to signal a departure, I think, from Trudeau. And he has to start to inoculate and take action on the irritants that were driving younger voters to the Conservatives. And so that means things like housing, affordability have to be front and center. And he's got to demonstrate a break, I think, with the Liberals on that and show that that is not getting left off to the side of the table in those first 100 days. He cannot take his eye off that stuff because he has to be able to be looking to remove that from Poilievre and from the Conservatives' ammo against him very early on.
I would take Poilievre's housing plan over the Liberal housing plan because like one is going to cost a lot of money and is going to be, I think, alienating to a bunch of people, and the other is a place where they could actually have some commonality and do something on. But whatever you do on housing, whatever plan it is, say it goes better than anyone could ever possibly imagine. None of those houses will be built anytime before the next election, and you're going to have no demonstrable success in it.
Well, it's not going to be easy to deal with affordability in a tariff environment either. Tariffs don't make things more affordable.
Sure.
Well, sure. But I mean, I think there are ways you can signal the right priorities. Like we have massive problems with our EI system. People are going to fall through the cracks. Go deal with that. Like there are places you can go there that signal that you are going to be catching people and looking after people. And I think that the Carney government has to be careful not to ignore those.
Be very careful going down the programmatic road where it's tweaking existing government programs and people don't really know who's the winner and who's the loser.
Well, sure. You could also just cut everybody a check that, like there's more than one way to square that circle.
Or you could approve Energy East and get a coalition with
but Kory, you want to talk about projects that are not going to bear any fruit for years. Like that's another fucking one. Like,
well, no, but like I think it's different in the sense that you get an agreement to do that and you start doing that. That's a big thing. Look, the U.S. has threatened Line 5 privately, on more than one occasion in discussions with the Canadian government and others.
That's a clear vulnerability.
And and we've got tariff steel. I would be getting an agreement while you have a Premier Legault who said he is open to doing that, and I would start fucking building it, and that will actually start right away. The contracts and things that you're going to be doing around that will be immediate employment. I would be building everything I could find to build that's consistent with reducing our reliance on U.S. exports. And look, the auto stuff, I don't think it's going to go well. I don't think Trump's budging on that. I think the auto industry is going to bleed out over the next 4 years, and we're going to be retooling a lot of plants and retraining a lot of workers. And we got to be finding things to do with them. So whether it's military procurement, whether it's the nuclear sector, you name it, whether it's building a pipeline that doesn't go through the United States. Those are things that you can do, and those are actual real contracts, and those are actual real jobs that are not, if you're talking about when will the pipeline be done, Jordan? Yeah, you're right. It'll be done long after the next election. People will start working on it the day you start cutting checks.
And I think an easy test of what should you do next is the list of things that could only be done because there's an air of crisis. We could only balance the budget in the mid-1990s because Canadians gave us unique permission at that moment because of a sense of crisis. So what are the things that people are unusually willing to allow government to do right now? And you start talking about energy infrastructure and those kinds of things, I would move on those things. And I do include the EU stuff in that. I would include those things that I was Carney so that he's able to demonstrate early in this new term, I'm moving on those things. I'm seizing the crisis. I'm taking action. That will demonstrate that he's not Trudeau. That will demonstrate that he's the Carney people we're looking at in the first 10 days of the campaign. And I would go hard on those things. And then hopefully he's got a basket of accomplishment that he can then say, now I wish to actually certify this direction with a Canadian vote.
All right, kids, we may have exhausted ourselves this morning, or at least exhausted me. So
I was exhausted before we started, just to be clear.
Yeah. So maybe let's return to our old habits and let's round this out with a hey you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
My Hey You goes to Mark Carney for all the conversations that we're having today and all the room full of worries and the 168, not 172 seats and all of that, I just want to say, my God, he almost pulled off a Ken Dryden, right? He's won the Conn Smythe as far as I'm concerned, right? He's definitely won the Calder because he is outstandingly the rookie of the year. He didn't quite win the Stanley Cup, but he's taken us to the finals. We'll see. We'll see what happens next. So he didn't pull off the full Ken Dryden, but it is an astonishing, unprecedented event. And so my hey you goes out to Mark Carney. I want to throw an additional hey you out there to our friend Jenny Byrne. You know, my God, what a fire this campaign has been. What a furnace. And lots of criticism, but look at the sturdiness of their vote. Look at where they won seats. Look at what they came through and accomplished. And I know there's still going to be a lot of internal firefighting within the conservative movement. But Jenny, God bless her. And, I do love her. Boy, man, whatever juice there was to take out of that orange, she got every drop of it last night. And that's no small accomplishment. Like that seat total and that vote coalition is an expression of strength.
Great. Jordan.
Well, I'm going to send a blessing out to Jagmeet Singh, who I think unquestionably had the most difficult night last night of any of the party leaders. And I think, I think he ran a campaign that was really tough to do in the best way that you could imagine doing it. He was pressed every single fucking day to deliver his own obituary and his own party's obituary, and he never once bit. He led that campaign with optimism and energy that I don't even know where somebody finds that. And last night, he did the right thing. He gave a very gracious speech. He gave remarks that talked about the importance of coming together, that talked about Team Canada. And I think that acknowledged some important truths about the enduring place of the NDP in Canada's political scene. So I think he was a credit to the party. I think he's going to be remembered as a consequential leader, and I would send a blessing out to him and his family. We're going to get to see a little more of him now.
Nice. Thanks, Jordan. Kory?
Well, I'm going to do an appeal to the better angels of both Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre. As we talked about earlier in this, I think this is a time for people to put country and unity above short-term political considerations. And I have a couple of suggestions for Carney. I already mentioned, like I would get Poilievre back in the House, and I'd do it in a magnanimous way. I'd let him stay in his house and do it in a magnanimous way. And for Poilievre, like I think there's an opportunity to build on what I think helped him close the deal with a lot of voters in the last few weeks, is to tone down the partisanship a little bit and reach out across the aisle on things that the country and conservatives have wanted to see done for a long time, whether it's resource development or whatever. But I think there's some opportunities for these two parties, which the vast majority of Canadians voted for, that agree on a very large number of things, to work together. And I hope that they both try to do that in a way that it is for the betterment of the country.
There you go. They're very nice as well. My hey you, I think you know what it is. First of all, I would, if I could, I would do Scott's, because I agree about Mark. So part of my hey you goes out to Mark, but the other part of it goes out to, of course, Chrystia Freeland, the second most responsible person for where the Liberal Party is today. I can't stress this enough, right? We were going to go through this election with Justin Trudeau and get smoked, maybe win 30 seats, maybe less. God knows what was going to happen. And that was going to happen. And that woman stood up and changed the whole dynamic. And we owe her a massive debt of gratitude as a party. So I personally express it to you. There was a lot of people who thought what you said, but not many who were doing something about it. And if you look at, you cannot trace this minority government, this 168 seats, anywhere but back to that action, as far as I'm concerned. So, hey, you, Chrystia Freeland, thanks for that. All right, folks, thanks for being with us today. You three, oh my God. I feel bad for myself for being here, but thank you three for being here. This was amazing. Scott, try not to fall asleep on the highway. All right. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN, Can Do, and TikTok Canada, and of course, Cole Caulfield. Go Habs. We'll see you next week with more of the Curse of Politics. Mondays, as always. See you then.